Thanks to Sana Skin Studio for supporting the No podcast. Sana is a skin studio that is shifting the relationship with your skin and your products through goal-driven facials, real guidance, and clean skincare. Stay tuned for our promo code so you can receive $25 off of your first facial at Sana Skin Studio. Welcome to the No podcast with me, Nikki Spo. What is up, truth speakers and light seekers? You are listening to The Know, where it is not about knowing everything, but about coming to know ourselves. I am your hostess, Nikki Spo, and I am so happy that you're here because today we are going to chat about what it means to be an experiential billionaire and how to build a life that is rich in experiences. Before I introduce the fantastic author who co-authored this book, Experiential Billionaire, I want to take a beat and remind you to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and a review. So, Joe Huff, probably one of the most positive humans I have ever met in my life, no lie. I met Joe many years ago when I was living in Los Angeles, which in hindsight, I realized was kind of a dark transitional time in my life. So we had mutual friends in common, and every time he was part of the group, I remember thinking, man, this guy is really positive. And I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life when I'm in a funk or whatever, and I just can't hear the positivity, you know? Do you know what I mean? So a few episodes ago when I was chatting with Paul Scanlon, we talked about how when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and how sometimes people are just here to nudge us along. Well, Joe is that guy. In a time in my life that was pretty chaotic, Joe was one of those positive seed planters in my life. So Joe Huff is obsessed with experiences and is determined to unlock the secrets of his and his co-author Bridget Hilton's power to transform lives. Joe has spent years interviewing social science experts, conducting one of the largest surveys on life experiences ever done, and turning himself into an experiential guinea pig of sorts. Joe has trained to be samurai. He has danced with the northern lights, has tracked silverback gorillas in a hailstorm, has stood face to face with hungry lions on safari, has sped across glaciers on dog sleds, has absorbed life lessons from Maasai tribesmen, has built schools for kids in need, has studied with monks, has helped give 50,000 people hearing, okay? He has swum with sharks and has explored all of the experiential riches that life has to offer. I am so excited for him because he has written this fantastic book that we are going to hear all about today. So let's get started with Joe Huff. Joe Huff, my friend, welcome to The Know, where it is not about knowing everything. It's about coming to know ourselves. And I feel like your new book, Experiential Billionaire, Build a Life that is rich in experiences and die with no regrets, taps into this idea of coming to a place of deep inner knowing within ourselves and prioritizing the things that really matter in life. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Nikki. And it's really good to reconnect.
Definitely. So as someone who hopes to author a book someday myself, what was the catalyst that made you say, okay, today is the day and I'm going to start this journey of sharing my expertise with the world?
So the life journey for me, I've always kind of embodied this whole experiential mindset. But always, when I say always, actually, it started at a very young age for me. I had a pretty bumpy go in my adolescent years. I basically got kicked out of high school and I barely managed to graduate. I wound up getting my diploma. I was making a lot of excuses and I was trying to figure out how to take some kind of responsibility for my life. I was kind of throwing everything away pretty early on. And something happened. What happened back then was my dad, who was only 48 years old, suddenly had an episode where we thought he had a heart attack. We rushed him to the hospital, but it turned out he actually had heart failure and his heart was failing right then. It wasn't like in the future. It was like his heart was failing. And they bumped him up to the top of the transplant list. And a few days later, he went on life support. And this is all so sudden. And that moment, it was just like this crushing moment of, wow, this is what life's about. Basically you put off all these things until your retirement and whatnot. And then maybe that doesn't ever happen, and it just felt like this crazy realization that, I think so many people live like that. And really watching my dad go through that, it just kind of made that statement that we all hear that our time is our most precious resource, really, I understood it for the first time, obviously, because when you're young, you think you're going to live forever. And
you hear it. You hear it, and it's like a theory. It's a theory that like doesn't apply to you.
Yeah, we're all superhuman when we're kids. And what happened was, as my dad went through that, the story has a happy ending. My dad wound up getting a heart transplant a couple months later. And it was a pretty, that during the period that we were waiting, I just had been made really aware that there wasn't a guarantee on how much time the rest of us have to fulfill our goals and live our dreams. And that changed my life really dramatically. I suddenly started to take a really hard look at what I was doing and the decisions I was making. And I started to think, well, what would happen if I did take responsibility for my life and I stopped making excuses and I started actually trying to think about what I cared about and what I wanted out of life and started trying to do those things. Because of my dad specifically, he had, after he got his transplant, he got out of the hospital and it was far from perfect. He actually was on permanent disability. He was making $716 a month. And, the doctors all told him to do the safe thing and stay in his tiny little apartment that was close to the doctors in the hospital. But after going through what he went through, he knew what was at risk and he said no. And he actually changed his whole life. He moved down to Mexico to this tiny beach town. He learned how to sail and he went dancing every night and went and kayaked and swam in the Sea of Cortez and did all these really awesome things because he knew that he was like, I don't have a guarantee. These are experiences I want to have that I had been putting off that I thought I would do, like in some retirement phase that almost got robbed from him. So his second life had a really huge impact on me. So I started trying to figure out what I wanted to do. The one thing that really changed my life the most, I think, was I started putting those things actually in my calendar. I started actually going, well, if I said I always wanted to move to the beach, why don't I move to the beach? And I found a couple of roommates and I moved to the beach. And a lot of things like that kind of snowballed until throughout my late teens and early 20s after high school, I just found myself constantly looking for new experiences and figuring out if I could have them. And the more of those experiences I had, the crazy thing was I just kept building more and more deep, meaningful relationships because that's how we build relationships, right? Is through shared experiences. And I definitely wasn't making money, right? I was actually, again, I barely graduated high school. My parents, we didn't come from much. I was a total blue collar kid growing up. My parents met on an assembly line making brake pads. So it wasn't like there was an option to let's travel the world now that I know that my time is finite. It was more of a, what can I do with very limited resources? That mindset, though, started opening up opportunities for things that I never would have imagined possible. And one of those being actually a friend of mine asked me to start a company with him. And I was like, I don't have any money, A. B, did you get the memo about me barely graduating high school? I'm probably not qualified. And it's funny because he actually said, you always seem to figure out how to get things done. Don't worry about it.
That's a life skill, Joe. That is a legitimate life skill.
Yeah. And I'm not advocating for, I'm not saying everybody, there's no benefit to higher education or trade school or whatever you're doing. I just think that people underestimate the value of our personal experiences in terms of our worth to people around us.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we joke about it even you want to work with the person that, is a varied kind of person, somebody that we say John that has a Rolex and drives a Lexus is kind of boring, but John that got arrested in Tijuana for an incident with the donkey and border patrol, that's a John I want to know. That's
I love that.
Kind of the fun story. That took me on a journey. And this is all, by the way, coming back to your original question. We wound up starting this company and it was a t-shirt company. So it's kind of a gross overstatement to say it was a company. It was two of me and my friend making t-shirts in a small garage. And that somehow grew and morphed into a shipping and warehousing business with over 100 employees. And this is actually when my view of wealth started to change again, because when my dad's episode happened, I was really, questioning what people place value on with their time. And then when this happened, when I got to this milestone of 100 employees with this company, I looked up and realized 10 years had gone by and I stopped doing all those things that I cared about that I had been doing. And I realized that I had the most money that I'd ever had in my life, but I actually was the least happy. For the first time, I felt like my life was bankrupt, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a really powerful moment. So, and then, randomly, right around that time, my dad's bonus round came to an end, and he actually did pass away. It's like a decade gone by. And it just really brought all those memories back of like how I felt when he was getting his heart transplant, and how I had found that urgency back then that I had lost over the last decade. And I felt super fortunate, of course, to have been able to build a company and, be entrusted, with a friend to do something together. It gave me enough of a refresher to say, what am I really doing and what do I want to be doing? And I left the company and I started a company that worked with charities because I knew that I wanted to do something that could directly change the world, I thought. And I know that sounds cliche, but I think that was the truth. And it was a really terrifying moment. Again, I finally had financial security, first time in my life. And I walked away from it. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, because what happened was I wound up getting to travel the world for the next 2 years doing water filtration in Haiti, and building schools in Guatemala, and helping rehabilitate victims of trafficking in Indonesia. And it was just the most impactful time of my life. And then on top of that, that's how I met my current business partner, Bridget, because she saw that I was doing this charity work, and she shared her idea of starting an audio company to make headphones and speakers to help people.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah. So we started that because of a video she saw, and she was working at Universal Studio. We have a very similar background. Her and I, she came from Flint, Michigan, and both of us grew up just kind of as the underdogs, wanting to help other people come up. We started listening with a high five. We jumped on a plane and went and figured out how to make headphones. And, it's funny because the way we describe it is it's not a traditional rags to riches type of story. It's a different kind of rags to riches story, because a year after Bridget and I met, we were on our first mission, giving a girl hearing for the first time. And we were actually on the ground in Peru. Yeah, it was amazing. We saw this girl, she had traveled really far. It was a full, her parents brought her, and she didn't know if she was ever going to be able to hear. And yeah, we actually put the hearing aids in, and all of a sudden this girl's eyes popped wide open, and she was she could hear. It was this incredible moment. Since that moment, the next 8 years, we wound up traveling to over 20 countries and giving 50,000 people hearing aids. So it was this incredible journey. And along the way, we had some of the most incredible life experiences you could imagine. But this is the answer to your question. People along the way, as we started to get more and more visibility, and we were partnering with people like Delta and Google and Spotify, people were saying to us, wow, you guys must be killing it. Beats sold to Apple for $3 billion. You guys must be super rich. And the truth was, as you probably are highly aware, most of us are, what you have on paper versus, what's in the bank as an entrepreneur is wildly different. So the truth was we were giving all of our money to charity, and, using whatever was left as, our marketing expense to travel and volunteer to work with the charities. And we weren't super rich, but we would joke and say, we're more like experiential billionaires. And we would never trade that though, because it was such a great, life experience. We can't lose that like you could lose money. You can always make more money. That's what we were continuously, saying. And then when COVID happened in 2020, the missions all stopped. So, we all of a sudden we had this company that we built literally to give hearing. It wasn't to sell audio products. And all of a sudden that part kind of got taken away because we couldn't go do that. And that's when we reached out to a bunch of folks and said, hey, what should we do? How can we, what's the best thing we could do to help, provide something in the world? And everyone's like, you should tell your story and talk about how to live this kind of life and why it matters. And that was the impetus for the book. We started writing out this book. It became a pretty different book, to be pretty honest. Again, once we started writing it, it kind of morphed into kind of a memoir that explains the whole theory around it all.
Yeah.
But that was the impetus to it all.
Well, I think that there's a tremendous power in storytelling, Joe, and that's part of why I have this show, right? Is to tell the stories of people like you and other experts in their field, and how I'm not interested so much in the destination, right? I'm interested in how did we get here? How did we arrive here? What did you do? What happened to you, right? That got you into this space where you are living a life that feels really pure and good to you. And, who's to say what should feel good and pure to anybody, right? Like some people might be doing what you're doing. Some people might be doing medical sales and they feel empowered and pure doing that because, whatever. I'm not here to place judgment on what people are doing, but how did we get to the space where we feel called to do that or feel like there's purpose in this. There's love and soul and meaning in what I'm doing. And I think that a lot of people, Joe, are craving that. They're craving the meaning behind what they're doing. There's millions of people going to work at jobs that they hate.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe some people are doing those jobs because they have to make ends meet, and then they go home and they have a hobby that they love doing, and that gives them the life and that gives them the fuel to go to the job they hate, right? Because they get this little respite from what they're doing to do what they really love. But how can we create more of that? And something that I'm hearing when you were telling this story is that it's just a abundance mindset. Like you said just now that you can always make more money. I really take that in and I'm like, I feel that. I've always felt that my whole life. I worked a lot. Also blue collar family, worked 3 jobs at a time, paid my way through college and everything. And I remember always thinking I'm not going to do this job that if I hate it, I know the money will come. And I know that if I just do the right thing and feel called and stand in my power and stand in my truth in the things that I'm doing and believe in, the money will show up. And I think that's a testament to having moving away from a fear-based or lack mindset and into an abundance mindset where you truly believe you're always going to be okay. You're always going to receive. The world is always going to provide for you. God or whatever it is that you believe in is guiding us and you will not be left stranded.
100%. And really, I think, to add even to that, that's really helpful to point out because it's actually not about, the book and our message specifically isn't about money versus experiences because they aren't mutually exclusive, right?
I think it's really important that you mention that.
Yeah, a lot of people, and I thought that, to be honest, when I was growing up, I was like, you could only do one or the other unless you were inherently wealthy. I didn't realize the value of experiences from a financial standpoint. But the point, actually, the end all be all is that the most important thing, though, that you need to absolutely make sure you're investing in is experiences throughout your life, because at the end of your life, you're not going to be on the hospital bed and go, can I just see my wallet one more time? You're not. You're going to literally think about the things you did with the people you loved. And, you're going to think about the things that you had said you were going to do that you didn't do. And you're going to regret that. So if you can start to really figure out what those things are, and a lot of people don't take the time to do that. What we're trying to do is show people how discovering that the experiences that they'll truly value, and then coupling that with the intention and urgency to go after those things. That's what leads to a life of limitless possibilities and potential. And of course, less regrets. We use our stories to show that that's possible and how that's possible. The reason we all love hearing a story is A, it's way easier to remember, but B, it's proof that it can happen for everybody.
That's right.
If you read the book, people will ask well, do you share any of the down things or the things that the lows? And I'm like, it kind of is a lot of lows. It's mostly lows.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can totally relate to that, Joe. Seriously. I'm like, well, there's a lot of lows in my story here. Do you want to really air out all of that? I think that the lows is where you do the most learning.
That's a great point. First, we question people once we started to think, okay, our experience is the most important thing in our lives, we thought, what do other people think, right? So we started asking friends and family, and then we went to retirement homes and interviewed elderly people that were at the last phases of their life. And then that led us to actually doing a survey of over 20,000 people around the world. And it's still running, actually. And it was really crazy because when we asked people what the things that they valued the most in their entire life were, a full third of people, it was a negative experience, something that shaped them, something that made them who they are. And I think that's just so telling. But you don't have those experiences a lot of the time unless you try something or go for something, or, a lot of the time it takes an action to create that kind of thing. So, and at times, of course, it was nothing that anyone intended, but it was something that happened that just showed them how powerful they really were, et cetera. So
I feel like I'm in that stage in my life, like I've shared very openly that 2022 was a very difficult year for me with like me getting pregnant, which was a planned pregnancy. And a week later, my mom died. My personal life was going up in flames. My 4-year-old son was diagnosed with cancer. I give birth to my baby. I'm like going through all these motions and emotions, right? And I'm looking back, it's almost the end of 2023 now. And I'm like, dude, I'm so strong and capable. And like my future is so bright because after the darkness comes the light. And for me, like I think about like, I'm so grateful for my sobriety, right? But I had to go through a bunch of shit and rock bottoms, like many dark nights of the soul to even get to my sobriety, right? Like this wasn't something that happened overnight. And like, and the reason why we say these things is because everybody has these experiences. It just comes in different packaging. Like mine might look like hitting my rock bottom as an alcoholic. And it might look like maybe, whatever, different life experience of my son getting sick. But everybody, the feelings are the same, right? It presents differently, but I think a lot of these feelings that people have are the same. And I think that a lot of people are yearning for that sense of fulfillment. And to your point that these life experiences, the bad ones and the good ones, ultimately are what bring us a sense of peace, wholeness, and fulfillment in life.
Absolutely. And that's why I think the older people get, the more they realize that stuff, right? The more they're like, this too shall pass, like the money things, all that stuff's temporary, right? The other things aren't temporary. The things that are like, how do you feel about how you're living, how you've lived your life, what you're putting into it, how, I somebody asked me, I thought a really interesting question in a podcast recently. They said, what is a successful, life look like to you at the end, like when you're dying that day, and I said, knowing I've been trying the whole time. I think you have those really big regrets in your life if you you didn't actually make the effort. And I think the reason that people like, yourself and myself and other people, a lot of folks like they go through a traumatic experience or any kind of near-death experience or sadly a death experience that's close to them. They go out and run that marathon and climb that mountain and propose to that girl and do all those things because they have that urgency that's just suddenly in there. And that's really what we're trying to do with Experiential Billionaires, give people that urgency minus the near-death experience, trying to show people, hey, remember this. And it's really powerful. I'll share an interesting anecdote. For me, and I think this as well, obviously, but why we wrote this book about this, and then we talk a lot about death in the book and about how thinking about that is important. It's not negative or morbid. It actually helps you live a more fulfilling, happy life as long as you contemplate your death eventually. And so, very aware of all this. And then, like yourself, I had a terrible 2022. My wife was suddenly diagnosed with stage 3 cancer when our son was 3 months old, and my oldest was 2 years old. And we had just finished the first draft of the book. And I was like, oh my, this is crazy. Like, this is what I'm telling people about. I don't need this reminder of how crazy precious life is. And my wife is an absolute warrior. And it wasn't like a very easy experience. She did 5 months of chemo and a double mastectomy and 5 weeks of radiation. But she beat it and she's cancer free. We're on the other side of it right now. Again, it's very new still. It's only been a year and a few months since it all started. But that, again, it was a week before my wife's 34th birthday that happened. So I was just giving a talk to some younger folks. And afterwards, one of them literally said, they're like, I get it, but because we do this exercise where you think about like, what if your doctor calls and says you don't have, you only have a year left to live, what would you do? And this one girl was like, it's hard for me to think about because that's never going to happen to me. And I literally am like, that's what everybody thinks. Everyone thinks it's never going to happen to you. And that's why everybody has a lot of regret when it suddenly does happen to you, because it happens to somebody, right? And it doesn't have to happen like now or, whatever. Whenever it happens, nobody's usually ready for it unless you're being intentional and fulfilling, and you're doing the work, I guess, is the easy way to explain it. It's not about, you don't have to climb Mount Everest or stay in overwater bungalows or anything like that. It's really thinking about the things that add value. And I had thought this from the get-go, obviously, family and the time we spend together and doing those things are super important. But even just the day-to-day smaller things, that's where a lot of the wealth the treasure lies in our kind of wealth metaphor. And then when we did the survey, that was really, really, really enlightening, because so many people listed stuff like, I want to learn a foreign language. I want to learn how to play an instrument. I want to learn a sport, things that totally are possible. You just have to actually do it. You just have to spend the time. And so many people, if they just chase those little things, start to fill in the cracks, are going to have a way more fulfilling experience with their lives. By the way, I'm very, very, very ecstatic to hear about your son and that everything's okay.
Same to you. You never know what people are going through behind closed doors. I had no idea about your wife, and I'm grateful too that she's doing well. And also, want to point out, I partnered with Baptist Health recently during October for breast cancer awareness, and it's just, people are encouraging, and I think it's important to share with our audience, especially because you've experienced this with your wife, that women are getting breast cancer earlier and earlier and earlier. And it's not like I think for insurance to cover it or whatever, it's like at age 40. And I want to be a voice that encourages women to check their breasts monthly, all the time, because it's not like you hit 40 and then you're susceptible to it. We're seeing women younger and younger, such as your wife, that are going through this, and it can be prevented. And I think that early detection is very important.
It's absolutely the key. There's never a good time to get cancer, but there's never been a better time to get treated for cancer, because the treatments are great if you can actually catch it. And, that's why getting screened and doing all those things is so, so, so important. So,
well, I'm happy to hear you guys are doing well. All right, guys, let's take a quick break so I can thank our sponsor, Sana Skin Studio, with their OG location in Wynwood and their additional locations in Fort Lauderdale and Coconut Grove. Okay, so the best way I can describe Sana is that it feels like coming home. Unlike traditional facials, Sana's facials are rooted in education, and I love this so much. Every experience I have had at Sana has been a chance for me to learn more about my skin and its needs. I love that the facials are effective while also being accessible enough to be a monthly ritual rather than a yearly splurge. This is why the Sana membership is so great. I'm honored to be able to provide our audience with a promo code. Use the code THENOGLOW for $25 off of your first facial when booking at sanaskinstudio.com, and additional incentives if you book a membership. I have absolutely loved my skin healing journey with Sana Skin Studio. I was thinking about something earlier with something you said, and about how society defines wealth. And I want to talk about that a little bit. And it's one of my favorite, and it's a little bit dark, but it's still good. It's a saying that says some people are so poor, all they have is money. And it's to your point of at the end of your life, are you looking and saying, well, let me see how much money I have in my bank account? So how do you think that society defines wealth? And do you think that more and more people are placing value on their experiential wealth?
Luckily, we are seeing a huge change in the younger generations about their understanding of what's important to them. It isn't all the material things. I think that a lot of older generations were just conditioned that money solved the problems, right? And of course, we all understand that, and you and I, especially a lot of folks, growing up working 2-3 jobs, that was the norm for me until my mid 30s, until my company started to work. There's a special kind of, panic and fear and anxiety, that goes along with not having enough money to pay your bills. But once you get to that point where your bills are paid, then it's really, really all about figuring out what to do with your time, right? Even in between, whatever time you have, it's still a choice. And I think a lot of people, we go through the excuse list in the book and kind of break it down, but everyone, the top excuses are time, money, and fear, really. And the money one is really interesting because a lot of the best experiences and a lot of super valuable experiences don't cost any money. So if you look at how society defines wealth, it's like money times a lot equals happiness. And that's just not true. It's experiences times a lot equal happiness. And And when we're young, we're equating experiences with money because we know we need some money to have some experiences that sound really cool, especially now you're scrolling and you're looking at people that are, travel influencers, et cetera. You're like, well, that looks cool, but I don't have $10,000 to go to Bora Bora. But that's really not the case. There's just a million things you could be doing for however much money you have. And for planning things that are bigger, items, it's really just about having that intentionality and doing that. So once you start to shift your mindset away from that, I think that it opens up endless possibilities. And you said something really interesting I just want to touch on. And once you start doing the work to figure out what you truly value, what experiences you'll care about, and then you start actually taking steps, you find that intentionality and urgency to go after it, right? Start taking steps like now, and this is the stuff we show you. The book is very action-oriented, extremely action-oriented. Once you start doing that, that's where that magical intersection of passion and purpose collide, and that's where you find that happiness, right? So you start figuring out what you're good at, you start figuring out what you like, what you care about, and you're putting more time into that. And once that happens, it's like, forget it. Like, again, I can tell you in the last, 15 years, I have had more times when I've been underwater by a lot financially, but still super happy. And then times when things were going great and I was so stressed. It's constantly, life is just, you just have to really be paying attention to what you care about.
So something that you just touched on was fear, right? And you have a chapter in your book, chapter 4, which is titled, "The Cave You Fear Holds the Treasure You Seek."
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Humans have a lot of glitches in our mental matrix.
Oh, we have glitches?
Yeah, we really do. But we often, one of the things with fear that's so interesting is most of the time the fears we have are just societal fears. We're we make out something to be, for instance, public speaking is a huge one. It's the number one fear most people have. When really the worst thing that could possibly happen is that people, people might not like what you say or how you say it or whatnot, but there's not nothing negative is going to happen. But we have this crazy ability to overestimate the negative possibilities and underestimate the positive potential. And once we start to address that, once we start to actually break down the things we're afraid of and go, what's the best thing that could happen and what's the worst thing that could happen? Usually the best thing greatly outweighs the worst thing.
Absolutely.
It's like, why on earth wouldn't I try it? An example I like to use is when I was younger, one of the things that was on my list that I decided I want to do is stand-up comedy. And, I wouldn't have done it because I was afraid of doing it. But I was like, well, what's the worst that could happen? We break down a lot of the different tools for goal setting and achieving goals in the book. And one of those is accountability partners. But I found a friend that wanted to do it as well that was also afraid. And we decided, let's sign up for an open mic night and we'll do it together. And we did it. And because of him as an accountability partner, I might have chickened out, who knows, but we actually wound up going and doing it. And it was actually great. It went super well. It was really fun. And, if it hadn't, and by the way, I continued to do stand up and I did have some nights where it wasn't great and it wasn't it was the end of the world. You try new things and whatever. But yeah, I think you just have to kind of face those things.
I want to be a comedian. On the low, I'm closet funny. I am funny on the low. And one of my biggest things that I want to do in my life is I want to do comedy. And it's so funny because I've never said that out loud to anybody. Literally, you're the first person I've ever said this to, is that I love comedy. I watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm I could totally do that. I would kill it out there on that stage. And who knows, maybe after this conversation, that might be something I face a fear and entertain, but it's really, really valuable. See, and this is the power of storytelling is you just sharing that with me in this an anecdotal experience, that you did and you faced that and you did it, that motivates me, and so if you're able to motivate me, I know that we're helping other people by having this conversation. And something else you talk about in your book is believing in the make-believe. And, there's that Roald Dahl quote is those who don't believe in magic will never find it. The word magic is a very big word for me. It was on the inside of my old wedding band. It's something that I keep the word magic in my house. I really feel I believe in magic. And I think that a lot of other people kind of would do well to believe in the make-believe also. So talk to me about that.
It's just so, again, to go back to how it's not about climbing Mount Everest or running a marathon. Like it's about finding the magic around you every day. And we can learn so much from kids. Like kids are great. Like you don't remember, but there was a day that was the very last sleepover you did, and you didn't know it at the time, but it's like, why did you stop, right? If you got together with a bunch of your friends and had a sleepover, I guarantee you it'll be a blast. If you go and have a water balloon flight tomorrow, it'll be a blast. If you do any of those type of childish things that you used to really love, we actually asked this in our survey, by the way, like what is something you did as a child that you loved doing that you would still love to do now? And we got so many awesome answers, whether it was like pillow fights or laser tag, and these are all things that people can do. They can do today, tomorrow. They're basically free or very, very, very cheap. And that's where you get that, that laughter, that connection, that joy. And this goes again to like the memorable part of life, right? How many evenings of scrolling Netflix are you not going to remember? And then how many times, if you do, for instance, like if you get together with your friends and do something really silly, you're going to remember that for the rest of your life. You're going to literally go, oh, remember that night that we all got together and we told, ghost stories by the campfire, or we, any little thing. My business partner, Bridget, has a great example that I'll share. She made her own wine in her garage that we got to taste. We were working on it for a while. And when she had the wine party, we all went to her place, and the entrance wasn't free. You had to write a jingle for her wine, pizza wine, because she loves pizza and wine. So every single person that came had to get up and perform the jingle that they wrote for the wine.
And people did it?
Oh yeah, every single person. And it was hysterically funny. And now we'll never forget that night. It was, again, like just the silliest idea. But there's so many examples like that where you can just create a theme around something or do something funny, and it'll just be an outrageously memorable experience.
I love that. So, in this, I want to talk about, because it's, like right now we're on a roll. We're like getting people inspired right now. This is like, we're like, I'm going to go do this. But like, we need to talk about the elephant in the room that is complacency, right? Like, cause it's also very easy to like fall into the place of complacency where we are like spending our time, Netflixing or whatever, movies until, which by the way is totally fine. Like, I know that, like, for example, when, I'm a co-parent, and when I get a break from my kids, I'm like, dude, I don't have energy to do anything right now. Like the way my night is made is either by like getting in my bed, putting my heating pad on, putting like cozy socks on and watching a show for an hour, and that's good for me. Is it the most memorable thing? No, but like it, like that feels good. And that's part of how I might recharge on a given day. But I think, that's a separate thing from actually being complacent in life, right? And like feeling that I don't have the energy to go do these things. And it brings me to consider, gratitude. So complacency and gratitude and being grateful for what you have, but also wanting more. And like, can you talk to me about how all of that makes like a soup of sorts, right? That sense of complacency, the message of like, be grateful for what you have, because I personally felt a lot of shame for always wanting more. Like I remember feeling like very much in an environment where I was like, you should just be grateful for what you have. And I'm thinking like, I don't know. I don't like feeling bad for wanting more for myself, but I don't want to be complacent, and I also want to be grateful. So like, how do all of these three things correlate?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I never heard it put like that, but I love that. I love the way you just framed that. So to me, grateful is how a feeling, right? That's how you feel now. That's a present state. And then having complacency is not having basically figured out what you want out of your one and only precious life, and not having any plans to do it, right? How many times people say, oh, I want to do this, or I always want to do that, et cetera, yet make absolutely zero plans whatsoever to actually do that thing. Like, for instance, you with comedy. Now that you told me, by the way, I am your accountability partner, I'm going to check in with you on this comedy thing. I'll be your coach. I'll help you with your
first. Oh my gosh, get ready,
month.
world. They're all like, sit down.
And it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And then the difference between, a complacency and just actually having like kind of like scheduled downtime, those are really different, right? Because I do think that it's super important and okay to say, okay, tonight I do want to have like a Netflix chill, put my feet up night. That's great. What a lot of people do though is they fill all their free time with that because it's easier. And
Yeah,
it just sounds, it's
that's
like
right.
they're not, it wasn't a choice. It was actually, we live in a world where everything is very, very intelligently designed to steal our time and our attention. So
Yes.
it's just so easy to just sit and scroll for 3 hours, not on purpose, right? So if you set that time and say, like tonight from 7 to 9 before I go to bed, I'm actually going to put my feet up and I'm going to watch a movie. Great. If you just come home from work, turn on the TV, and just kill time, you're basically spending we all have the same 1,440 minutes a day. If you spend that time, you don't get it back. It's like little sand in the hourglass. So the easiest way to overcome that and overcome the complacency part is to figure out first what you care about. And we do a little exercise. There's a couple things that I think are really helpful. One is the memento mori chart, and that's in the beginning of our book, and it's in our card deck as well. But it's basically 76 squares, each one representing 1 year in the average human life. And you look at that chart and you fill out all the boxes that you've already lived. And then you can see how many that you have left potentially. Obviously, some people, you have it right there, which is great. This is a crazy visual reminder. This gives people like the heebie-jeebies, but it also gives people this like, whoa, I didn't think of it like that.
Right.
So using that kind of tool, we do another thing, like I said, the treasure map exercise, where we have people imagine their doctor just called and they told them they only have a year left to live. And what are the 10 things they would do? And what always happens is after we get people to write down those things that they would absolutely find a way to do, or they would be, overwhelmed with regret. And we ask them afterwards, how many of those things are you currently working on? And it's none. It's like almost always none. It might be one out of however many, 10. And once you have that realization that those are the things you're going to care the most about, why aren't you working on them now? The next thing is, let's break it down into something we can do. Because the reason we don't start a lot of those things is because we look at it in these big, giant, nebulous kind of like, how do I...
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. So instead, what we always say is just break down all the way down to the very first smallest step you could possibly take and do that like today, or put it on your calendar for this week. Just start. Like starting a business is a great example of, it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around like what it takes to start a business, but anyone can get a business license. Anyone can get a trademark. Anyone can figure out like a name for their company. Everyone can write a business plan. Like those things are free or very, very cheap. And if you just start taking steps, you'll be surprised at how many things happen. Just like, you just saying like you want to do comedy, I guarantee you're going to probably have a handful of people reach out to you and go, oh, that'd be so great. You should do this, X, Y, Z. So once you start to vocalize, you turn these like kind of these wishes, these dreams into actual plans. And that is a big, giant step that takes complacency and moves it into action. And, it doesn't have to be all at once. It's so much better to take a tiny step every day than to try to like have that plan like my dad had, where, say, I'm going to do all this stuff when I retire. And then maybe that doesn't happen. And, my wife's story, I think, is really pertinent because when we got the diagnosis, when we got the pathology after her double mastectomy and finally found out that she was cancer-free and the treatments had worked, this was 8 months post her diagnosis. We looked at each other and we're like, what do we do, next? And our plans stayed the same. There was no changes because we had been doing all these things that we knew what we wanted to do. We knew exactly, we just had more urgency than ever to keep doing those things. Where my dad's story, he had to change his entire life. Yeah. So if people can start taking those steps,
baby steps,
you don't want to have to rebuild your whole life because of, something happening. And then all of a sudden you're going, oh my gosh, I've got to try to cram it all in at the end now because I didn't realize that decades went by and I didn't do anything I wanted to.
Right. So you talk about in the book turning negatives into positives. Now, how do we do that without bypassing? You also say in your book that the only way through is through.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I'll use another comedy reference, right? Comedy equals tragedy plus time. So almost everything that goes on in your life that's negative, at some point in the future, you'll laugh about. it's sad to say that, almost every single thing, and it might take a year, it might take 10 years, it might take a week. And then there's things, of course, that aren't ever going to seem funny or be funny, like losing, a traumatic experience or losing a loved one or something like that. But those things still bring very positive internal things. For instance, like that feeling of gratefulness, that moment that I had with my business when I felt like my life was bankrupt, that coincided, like I said, with my dad passing. But two other things happened actually at that exact same time. My dog died suddenly, and my first wife and I got divorced very suddenly also. And I was really, really going through this moment of like, why my dad, why is this happening, blah, blah, blah. And I just had to step back and go, what do I have to be grateful for? And instead, I just started thinking about how much positive I had out of all of these things. I was so fortunate that I had a relationship with my dad and that he had this second lease on life and that I got to watch him have this wonderful second chapter. And I'm lucky that I had fallen in love and gotten married and, it didn't work out, but a lot of people don't have that experience. And I just thought that, well, I'm very lucky to have that. And I'm lucky to have had a dog and live in a place where you can have a dog and, live that kind of wonderful life. And that changed a lot, for me. Like I immediately just felt this different feeling about all of those experiences. And I was like, okay, well, like I can take that and I can grow. And it's kind of the hero's journey concept, right? Where nobody wants to hear a story about somebody that nothing happens to, right? We all want to hear the story about the person that was like less than, perfect, whatever, and underdog, and something terrible happens that they have to overcome, but they do. They go through, they slay the dragon and go through the fire. And the other side, they come out this incredibly, just a new version that's so much better, so much, more fulfilled.
Joe, you are amazing. I can't wait to finish your book. I haven't been able to finish the entire thing, but it's already tremendously helpful. And I think that anybody can relate to this. I don't think that there's any person on this planet that could not get something from this book. And I'm so grateful that you had the courage to write it.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. That really means a lot.
So tell us where people can find you and Experiential Billionaire.
Experiential Billionaire on Amazon, of course. And we also have our website, experientialbillionaire.com. And then my personal site is joehuff.com, where you can find out more information about my keynotes and corporate workshops. And my business partner, Bridget, also, she has one, bridgethilton.com.
Joe, thank you so much for your time. I love chatting with you, and I just hope that you continue to change lives for the better. I know that you will. And, even today, like you've changed my life. So I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. I really appreciate being on.
This podcast was brought to you by Sana Skin Studio. Be sure to use my code, TheNoGlow, for $25 off of your first facial at Sana when booking via sanaskinstudio.com. More than a skin studio, Sana is a movement towards healthier skin and self-love. Thank you so much for listening to The Know. If you loved this episode, go ahead and share it with a friend. Words are so powerful, and someone may need to hear what we covered today. And if you really loved this episode, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review. Your comments are so important and valued, and they give other listeners insight on what to expect on The Know. You can connect with me personally via Instagram at Nikki Sapp Spo and The Know with Nikki Spo. My hope for you today is that you are fearless in looking inward so that you can be your highest, most authentic self and go after the life of your dreams.